Dendrophobia, the fear of trees. That's what you might feel after hearing this story. It's about a creature, neither animal nor vegetable, but somewhere in between, that is said to stealthily stalk wanderers on the pampas, the desolate plains of Chile. I am going to start off by reading a short story from 1897 describing an encounter with this dreaded tree beast. But stay tuned afterward as we examine the murky truth that might actually lie behind this legend. Today on American Strangeness, fiction, folklore, and the truth in between, in the tale of the terrible Lamparagua. Lamparagua by May Crommelin. When staying lately in Chile, being interested in the superstitions of the lower caste, which is mainly of Indian origin, I heard, among other curious legends, darkly of one which seemed peculiar to this country. Next, chance acquainted me with a gentleman, one of the principal English residents in Chile, who kindly gave me details of the dread Lamparagua. This wizard-like creature, of which many persons in the country have never even heard, is strangely enough supposed to inhabit fertile and cultivated districts. And Mr. L. was assured by his laborers that one Lamparagua or more infested the marshy edges of a lake, as is its favorite haunt on his own estate, Culipran. In the following tale I may have overstated the height of the thing, concerning which and its mode of progression the details were not exact. Otherwise, its appearance, diet, and the means it employs to secure its victims are faithfully reproduced, according to the description unwillingly confided to Mr. L. by some of his own peones. And these are men who are declared by Europeans neither to feel pain nor to know fear. The two men held on stealthily riding since 2 hours before dawn, going all day without stopping, save for a brief noontide halt. During the afternoon of yesterday, their track had lain across an utterly desolate pampa. Therefore, they had pushed on to reach uncultivated country again, and water before nightfall. Now, towards evening, they found themselves near a long lake, bordered with reeds, the haunt of numberless wildfowl. A small rocky valley, down which the active Chilean ponies warily scrambled, grew greener towards the lake shore, where a stream which the travelers had followed for some time widened into a V-shaped marsh. "It is near sunset, Pedro. Let us camp here for the night," said Ramsay, shivering slightly, for the fever had taken him 2 days ago. "Own the truth, man. You have lost your bearings and don't know whether we are 9 miles or 9 leagues from the silver mine. Besides, the horses, poor beasts, will be dead beat." "Of what good is a horse that cannot do his 60 miles when asked?" returned the Chilean guide. "But truly, the devil seems to have been driving round on these hills, changing their shape since last I came this way." He gazed with discontent deepening on his swarthy features at the hills behind, hiding the sandy desert, far beyond which rose the mighty range of the Andes, still veiled in rosy haze this hot December evening. Then, in sudden recollection, "There is a rich Englishman who lives near a lake in this neighborhood. He has smelting works and a large estate. The house may be close at hand." "Or it may be on the opposite shore," said Ramsay, warily dismounting. "Hobble the horses, and let us go up to yonder hilly ground jutting into the lake. Then, if you can see signs of a hacienda, we'll make a last push for it. If not, I rest." "Why not, Patron?" said the Waso, using the almost invariable courteous Chilean accent to assertions or requests. Up among rocks and brushwood, master and man climbed, till, advancing to the far crest of the hillock, they scanned the lake shores attentively. Northwards, at a mile's distance, a wooded headland arrested their vision. South and west there was no human habitation in sight, though the ground here and there showed signs of cultivation and the pasture was good. Right across the lake the sun was sinking gloriously red, against the background of the pale olive green and lilac hues seen so often in the southern Pacific sky. Soothed by the spectacle, Ramsay sat down on a rock to rest and smoke, and with Indian impassibility Pedro did the same. All gringos were mad, he knew. If this one liked staring at nothing, he was more easily pleased than some of the foreign lunatics. But presently Pedro became aware that there was something to be seen among the rocks below. Signing to Ramsay, both men peered stealthily past screening myrtle bushes and witnessed an evening domestic scene in animal life. The ground rose in two broken ledges from the marsh, and on the upper one a dog, fox, and vixen were playing with their cubs near some crannies where was doubtless their home. Presently the mother left the rest and stretched herself sleepily in the evening sunlight midway on the grass ledge. One cub followed to bite her neck, but, on being repulsed, returned to gambol with his brothers. As he watched them, Ramsay also noticed vaguely a low withered tree, standing in the marsh 20 yards below, alone, and partly submerged, with a hollow cleft in its side. All at once the peon touched his master's arm and pointed open-mouthed towards the vixen. She had risen as if in terror, both her head and brush curved towards the ledge. Then, while her forepaws seemed firmly planted gripping the turf, she was drawn broadside some yards toward the edge by invisible means. The other foxes, old and young, meantime disappeared into the twinkling of an eye into the rock crevices. As both men eagerly gazed, the vixen's tension relaxed. On the brink she recovered herself, and standing still for 3 or 4 seconds, as if dazed after deadly effort, she turned tail and darted toward her lair. 2 springs only, on the third she paused in mid-flight. Once more she resisted, but was dragged back towards the edge, this time tail foremost. At the same time, a rush of wind sounded like a shh in the stillness. Ramsay knew now he had heard the same sound 2 minutes before, but had fancied it a light breeze among the leaves. Craning his neck forward, Jock believed he could see an agonized expression in the creature's eyes, as against her will she slid inch by inch over. The fall was not great. A lower grassy terrace surmounted the marsh. Even as they whispered, the watchers saw the victim rise. A second time, but feebly like a mouse released from the deadly grip of a cat, the poor she-fox crawled away with drooping brush toward the sheltering rocks. Ramsay searched the marsh with a sportsman's keen glance to discover whether the creature had been lassoed by some invisible means, and where was the native hunter. Then he bounded to his feet, and pointing towards the withered tree, his arms stiffened with amazement, exclaimed, "Look!" The cleft in the tree trunk was visibly widening and gaping, till it looked like a hideous bark-lipped mouth that was drawing a long inspiration. Again there came the same sound in the air, and the vixen, curled in a helpless quivering ball, was borne 5 yards, as on a wind-blast, disappearing right into the hollow of the tree. The withered wooden lips contracted over the creature's living head. 2 dead branches above stirred slightly, like antennae. The cleft closed, leaving a jagged scar in the tree trunk. That was all. The scene was still and peaceful as before. A flight of wild ducks circled twice over the lake, and then alighted on the surface with distant quacks. Behind an a fuchsia thicket a native thrush was singing. The tree was immovable. Wondering if he could be dreaming, Ramsay turned to the peon. Pedro's copper skin had taken a pale yellow hue, and he was shivering, though a Chilean peasant is brave to savagery. "The Lamparagua! Fly!" he gasped with a cry of horror, and plunged downwards among the rocks. Jock overtook him just as the Wasso leaped barebacked on his horse. "Stay for me, my lad. At the valley head in safety, I'll not leave the saddles and blankets," said the Scotchman coolly. But his own breath fluttered in his throat more than from the run, and while his hands tugged at strap and buckle, his head turned to glance at the tree that remained motionless in the distance. Rejoining Pedro, who waited half a mile away, the master found the peon on his knees, crossing himself and gabbling over and over every scrap of the Latin prayers he could remember, which the padres had taught him in boyhood. They were few, and he mixed them so ludicrously that his listener almost laughed. "Holy Santa Rosa, miserable sinner," ended Pedro, rising and saddling up with remarkable haste while throwing off some last ejaculations of this rare access of piety. "It was a witch, senor. The country is full of spirits. Holy Saint Peter, I ducked your image last autumn in the sea. Forgive, but those fishermen are such blasphemers, and rail against you at the first bad weather. I abjure all evil livers. Holy—" An awful oath followed as the pony swerved. Pedro stuck his huge rowels in the beast's flanks and cantered furiously away, his poncho filling with air as he worked his arms like a windmill's sails, shouting, "Ride, ride, patron! Leave this God-forsaken country, quick!" "Aye, if only our horses can travel," muttered the Scotchman. True enough, the tired beasts soon showed that they could not be roused long enough beyond an ambling motion, not unlike the gait of a Peruvian pacer, but which, when unbroken all day, may cover a great distance before nightfall. Not till they had gone some miles could Ramsay persuade his terror-stricken guide to talk sensibly. "What is this beast tree, Lamparagua, you called it? Does it exist elsewhere in Chile?" "Who knows, senor? I only heard of such rare trees as northern witches from a rough roto who came from this country. I remember it was one evening in July, 10 years ago, as we sat in a circle on the ground round the brazier. We thought he was improvising a tale, as we had in turn improvised or recited songs and legends, telling lies for fun, as the patron may know is our custom. There was naught more I could call to mind, save that they swallowed animals and lived near marshy places. Saints preserve us! Ride on to the mines. Stop here? Never." Ramsay dared not lose sight of the man. At least Pedro knew something of the country. He might strike their right track soon, so the soft twilight of the south drew round them as they rode warily. As the night came, black and moonless, as they bent in their saddles, more weary yet, the reins lay loose on the horses' necks now, Pedro trusting to the animal's instinct. For the good land could not be far where men lived, and there were homesteads and supper and provender. When midnight was past, Ramsay felt his strength going from him. By the faint starlight they had just plashed through a gravelly stream, in which the horses stopped to drink before reluctantly stumbling up the far bank where their hoofs struck muffled on grass. "Pedro, I can hold up no longer," called the engineer feebly, reeling in his saddle, as an ague fit shook him like a rigger. "Leave me, if you will. I must lie down." Guessing by his master's voice that the latter must be very ill, the peon hastily came to Ramsay's help in dismounting, then guided him to the shelter of some bushes that were faintly discernible. Here he placed a saddle under the sufferer's head, and laid a blanket over him. Not far off there was a small grove of shrubs, darker than the surrounding twilight, beside which rose a big tree with a huge bulbous base and exposed roots like those of a cotton tree. Near this Ramsay's horse strayed, cropping the grass. So Pedro, following, tethered him to one of these roots, which he had discovered by stumbling against them in the blackness. "Caramba," he muttered, "stay there, animal not to be trusted." His own beast knew him, and never went far from its owner's side. Then the guide sat down beside his exhausted patron, who slept for fevered snatches, or woke to ramble in delirious talk. So the time passed till the faint light strengthened. All at once Ramsay fancied he heard Pedro's voice crying out in a tone of desperation, or was it terror? "Me voy, I'm off to bring you help." The sick man did not heed, though vaguely conscious he was left alone. It seemed to him that he was in a hospital. The doctor would come round presently. If not, it was peaceful to lie still. Was that his mother, lifting the hair on his fevered brow? Then he started awake as a horrid cry roused his dulled ears. It was the scream of a horse. What was this well-known valley? Where was he? For, raising himself weakly on one elbow, Ramsay saw a stream running past rocks which were strangely familiar, and yet when had he seen them? The river emptied itself in marshy land. The dawn showed a dark gray surface beyond, like a sea or lake. With a cold terror, the sick man recognized that he lay not 200 yards from the marsh of the Lamparagua. That headland, the water, all night they must have ridden in a circle. The horrible scream was already fading from his sick memory like a dream, when a snorting and scuffling noise caused Ramsay to turn slowly his weak head. He saw his horse stamping, pulling back from its halter, and with distended eyeball staring terrified at a tree, to a root of which it was fastened. What was wrong? The tree had two bare topmost branches like horns, and some lower ones also without leaves. Yet this was summertime. In December, it was withered, and there above its onion-shaped bole was surely a dark scar, a crack. Oh, horror! The top of the tree was that of the Lamparagua, in the marsh. And now, as Jock stared with fever-weakened eyes through the dim daybreak, the lower branches moved slowly downwards, clutching the horse's halter with claw-like twigs. The crack in the side of the thing was widening. Again, a fearful sound woke the sleeping glen, the horse's cry of terror. Jock tried instinctively to find his revolver, but his senses reeled as the tree aperture gaped, opening upwards. The horse was drawing towards it, nearer, fighting, struggling. Then 2 shots rang out, and a man fainted, and knew no more. When Jock Ramsay came to himself, the sun was high in the heavens. He was sheltered by wild myrtle from its heat, and though very weak, his senses had come back. Memory was slower. Ah, he remembered. Opening his eyes in a wide stare of apprehension, Ramsay saw himself lying alone. There was a thicket near, but not the awful tree. Pedro was gone, so were the horses, but perhaps that last vision of the thing engulfing the poor roan cob had been a nightmare, a fevered frenzy. Feebly reconnoitering the ground, the sick man noticed that he lay on a grassy slope between the stream and the rocks where the foxes lived, a small cape. Behind his head the ground must be open up the valley. There lay safety away from the horrible marsh and the Lamparagua, if there were such a tree indeed. Surely it had all been a hideous dream. Drawing the myrtle leaves aside, as one might a curtain, Jacques feebly turned himself to examine the glen. Then his fingers clenched, his breath stopped, and a thrill of horror froze his spine. The tree was there, out in the open, on the grass, with not a bush near it, right between himself and safety. Take it quietly, for manhood's sake. Think out this business, and don't turn faint like a schoolgirl seeing a snake. First, was the whole affair a dream? Was that withered tree out yonder on the sward the very Lamparagua? For it so, there were several, or it could change its situation. It was neither in the marsh nor by the fuchsia thicket. Oh God! For as he peered, Ramsay believed that the tree was moving. It was horribly near, and it was surely creeping forward by inches. He held his breath, and marked a grass tuft at its bulbous base. Now it had passed beyond the tall, silvery grass plumes and spear leaves, and was close by a stone, was stealthily rounding it. Yes, the thing was approaching him. Doubtless it had stayed quiet till now, gorged with its morning meal, but it was slowly nearing its next victim. With eyes fascinated by fear, Ramsay saw its roots moving forward like giant knotty suckers that gripped and held fast in the herbage, noiselessly moving with the motion of a tortoise. The hair of the young man's flesh stood up. An icy coldness numbed his blood. Then, with a strong effort, he gathered his senses to think out escape. The rocks ahead were his only chance. There, among the crannies, where the foxes had their dens in hidden safety, he could hide. But he could not rise. His head was dizzy with fever. His strength was as running water. His legs and feet seemed not his own, mere useless weights to be dragged out by sheer pluck. For he had already started. Grasping the myrtle stems to give himself an impetus, Ramsay was crawling away toward the rocks, foot by foot. He lay outspread like a lizard, for his only strength remained in his arms and chest. Inch by inch, he crept onward as fast as he could go, clutching at the grass tufts, at the sagebrushes, drops of perspiration running down his face. Faster, faster, if it could only be done. The man had covered some yards. Surely the tree moved more slowly. Ah! A blast flew backwards over Ramsay's head, raising his hair. By instinct he dug his nails into the ground, flattening his body as much as he possibly could. The indraft was as if air had rushed by into a deep cavity, while a sound like that of an escape pipe hissed in the air. Then it was over. As drowning men are said to see 1,000 past scenes in a few moments, so, in an agonizingly lucid flash, Jacques Ramsay reviewed his life. Then he recalled yester-evening, how the wretched fox had gotten breathing time twice, as once he had now. How long would this horrible game last? The beech tree was paralyzing the human being. He thought of a snake fascinating a rabbit. Slowly, more feebly, the victim still crawled. Why did that second blast not follow? Could the Lamparagua be so near it needed no aid beyond that of its cruel hooked branches? He must see. Turning his head, as he still dragged himself onward, the fever-stricken wretch beheld a strange sight. He had left his blanket behind upon the ground when first making his escape, and it was now wrapped round the tree bole, as if the Lamparagua had failed to suck it in, and was wrestling with this unknown prey, both branches holding it fast outspread on claw-like twigs. It was a respite, a few seconds more of air, light, life. Yes, the beech tree was standing still, yet it had covered more ground than its hunted prey during the time both had moved. Ramsay felt for the revolver in his pocket. There was one bullet left, he knew, and if escape were hopeless, then... At last, the rocks were near. The man began scrambling painfully up a steep incline of loose earth and rounded stones which resembled a moraine, and that gave no hold to his desperate grasp. Looking up, he saw with hopeless eyes that there had been a slight landslip lately, which had left the bank projecting overhead, so that he could not reach the top. looking down that the Lamparagua was slowly but steadily approaching, once more over the grass, foot-root following foot-root. There was a torn piece of crimson blanket hanging on one bough. He must struggle across the face of this treacherous slide to where a clump of yuccas were smoldering, their stems blackened as one often sees them, whether from spontaneous combustion or sun-fired in some inexplicable manner. No man knows. Fire, the smoking plants, suggested a thought to the man. He stayed still, holding on halfway up the scree. He felt for his matchbox. There were 2 matches left. Then Ramsay, instead of longer seeking escape upwards, flung himself in still more desperate eagerness down the steep slope again towards his enemy. He was at bay. Where the grass began, the man stopped and stooped, plucking dry blades and twigs with the haste of one who has but a few moments to live should this plan fail of success. Not a drop of rain had fallen since last October. The scorching summer heat had burnt the grass to tinder. There came the spurt of a match. 2 moments. 5. The fire spark, kindling, seemed about to spread when a roaring wind gust through the valley's stillness blew it out, and the man felt himself sucked irresistibly towards a clump of prickly pear to which he clung palpitating, with his face pressed against the thorny broad discs that tore the skin to bleeding. Ah, that was over. For the last time, one chance was left. One match. Again, Ramsay snatched what dry fuel lay within his grasp as he sheltered beneath the bushes. His papers, checkbook, all were in a small valise he had instinctively thrust overnight under his saddle pillow. There was one letter left in his breast pocket, which he had carried there 2 years, the last one ever written by his mother. He tore it out. With shaking fingers and blinded by blood drops he dared not wait to wipe from his eyes, knowing that while the Lamparagua was stalking a yard nearer at each motion, its victim carefully struck the match. Sheltering the tiny flame with one hand, he turned the wax stem gently till it lit. Next the letter, and the fire licked the words, "My dearest son," then blazed and crackled in the funeral pyre of broken bramble and dried myrtle leaves that burnt a dead woman's last token of love to her youngest born. Gladly would she have known it sacrificed on the slight chance to save his life. Ramsay thrust both hands deep into the burning mass, and recovering strength in the excitement of hope, he staggered towards some clumps of tall grass of the pampas a few feet away. The sparks fell, making a trail as he went that caught the dry herbage. Hurrah! How the giant grass stems took fire, blazing high in a glorious bonfire. A hasty glance over his shoulder. The Lamparagua was not 12 yards distant. Its jaws were widening, but the firewall was between them. There came a rush of wind ending in a sound more fierce than a wounded lion's roar. The man was caught by the blast as he stood upright, weak yet defiant, matching his puny being against the strength of the brute tree, with the help of the mind within him controlling the fiery element as a weapon. Sucked forward, blinded by smoke, scorched, Ramsay fell on his face and lay still with a last conscious effort to save his life. Beyond his body, the myrtles and fuchsias were crackling. The tall cahul blossoms blazed like high torches. The fire was spreading, leaping up to the boldo branches in yonder thicket, running over the open ground in a low sheet that burnt the Lamparagua roots. For a half-minute, the thing stayed, trying to stand its ground. Now it was in full flight. The great sucker feet were traveling over the burning herbage, dragging its tree trunk with agonized efforts, yard upon yard, towards the stream. 5 minutes later, there came a galloping of horses down the valley, men's shouts. But Ramsay did not hear them. He seemed to lie prone at death's door, too weak to enter unless spirit hands lifted him over its threshold and brought him within to be at peace and rest. But they were earthly hands that were now trying to pour some brandy down Ramsay's throat. When his eyes opened, Pedro was supporting his master's head, while a group of men around were watching the stranger curiously, foremost among whom was an English gentleman. "Coming to all right," said the latter. "A near shave that. You began to smoke, I take it, finding yourself pretty nearly lost and famished, so the valley got fired. We have been out searching for you since morning, when your man rode up to my hacienda, worn out and demented. We passed the head of the valley at 10 o'clock, but could see no sign of your horse, which Pedro said he had tied to a tree. What's the matter?" For Ramsay struggled up and was staring round. "The tree! It was out there before the fire. Pedro, you know? Where is it gone?" Pedro only shivered and stared. Some of the other peones, muttering and giving sidelong glances at each other, crossed the burnt ground looking about them. One saw a partly submerged tree at some distance downstream, floating slowly into the marsh. His attention was caught by a gleam of something scarlet, tangled in the topmost withered bough. A few days later, Ramsay was stretched at ease in a cane-decked chair, with a tall glass of iced drink in the wicker socket by his arm. Overhead, a veranda was shaded by masses of roses, stephanotis, and bignonia. Sunshine flooded the garden, stretching beyond like a dream of enchantment, where tall palms shot above high-flowering trees, and oranges and lemons were mingled lower with gardenias and poinsettias. Jock had just finished after talking during some 20 minutes, so felt thirsty, exhausted, and excited. "That's the whole story," he ended. "Now do you believe me, Mr. Campbell? Till now I fancy you thought me mad." "No, but possibly a bit delirious in your fever, so that you imagined some tale Pedro told you of the Lamparagua had really happened to yourself. That was all," said the kindly host. "Man alive, there is Pedro to witness also, and where is my horse? And your own lad saw the torn red blanket in the marsh," cried Ramsay. "True, quite true," nodded Campbell, coolly reflecting. "Well, my dear fellow, if it is any satisfaction to you, I do believe you are one of the few living human beings who have seen the Lamparagua. What is more, for some years back I have heard rumors of such a thing, and that it haunted this lake and another adjoining it, both on my estate. But, to confess the truth, I fancied the story was a convenient legend of my cattle herds to account for missing beasts. Yes, I believe, but hardly anyone else will, even in Chile, among our own wise educated class. Of course the peones know. They are nearer nature than we." The end. Cromlin added in a footnote that Lamparagua literally means lamp of the water, a kind of will-o'-the-wisp, or ghost light. Though why a light is associated with the tree was not apparent in the account of it given to the writer. The Lamparagua was published in the August 1897 issue of the Pall Mall magazine, but it may be more than just a short story, capturing genuine folklore of an arboreal monster in South America. Author May Crommelin, whose full name was Maria Henrietta de la Cheroy Crommelin, was born in Ireland to a family considered French gentry, descendant from a Huguenot linen merchant. The family wasn't wealthy, though, and Crommelin began living independently in her own London flat in 1885, supporting herself as a writer. Crommelin and her sisters were considered the heads of the family after the deaths of their father and brother. She was very well traveled and based many of her 42 novels on insights gleaned from her own adventures. Crommelin toured South America in 1894. Her biographical book about this trip, titled Over the Andes from the Argentine to Chile and Peru, is an excellent travelogue containing Crommelin's detailed impressions of the people, culture, flora, fauna, and landscape she encountered. This adds an air of authenticity to the Lamparagua, although it is unclear if the title character is truly based on an actual piece of Chilean folklore she heard during her South American trek, or whether it was just an artistic conceit. Muddying the waters here is Crommelin's suggestion that her short story was based on actual accounts she heard of the Lamparagua. She included such a statement as the intro to her tale in the Pall Mall magazine, and as a footnote in her 1900 novel, The Luck of a Lowland Laddie, which continued the adventures of hero Jock Ramsay and reused the Lamparagua as one of its chapters. The footnote in the book reads, "The dread Lamparagua is by no means a creature of pure fiction. When I was staying a few years ago in Chile, a well-known English landowner in the north gave me an account of this tree beast. Mr. L. was assured by his laborers that one Lamparagua or more infested the marshy edges of the lake on his own estate at Culapran. As to its size and manner of movement, the details were not exact, but its appearance, diet, and means of seizing its victims are faithfully reproduced from the description unwillingly imparted by the peones to their master. These men dreaded it as a kind of wizard. They are very superstitious, but otherwise are declared by Europeans neither to feel pain or to know fear." Crommelin's Lamparagua appears to be a stew of legends from the areas she visited in Chile. It can hardly be coincidence that there is a Lamparagua within Chilean oral tradition, as documented by Julio Vicuna Cifuentes in his 1915 collection of the country's myths and superstitions. El Lamparagua, according to traditions in the Andes and translated from Spanish, is a formidable reptile with strong claws that moves underground, not very deeply, along paths it opens itself, which resemble real tunnels. From distance to distance, it raises its head to the surface, in the middle of a pasture, at the entrance to a village, and if it is hungry, it devours everything around it, including people, animals, and crops, then continues its subterranean path, undaunted. In Santiago, the Lamparagua is a colossal reptile of extraordinary voracity. It indiscriminately devours everything in its path, either to satisfy its appetite or to remove obstacles that hinder its path. It has been seen drinking streams and rivers that blocked its path, and crossing over to the opposite bank on the dry riverbed, to continue its work of devastation with equal persistence. A parallel version of the Lamparagua story in Santiago describes it as a snake, and that gives us the clue as to what the creature might really be. For in neighboring Argentina, Ampalagua is a name for the boa constrictor occidentalis. The reptile entered Chilean tradition, wrote Cifuentes, exaggerating its proportions and appetites, and was given the mythical character by which it is only known in our country. Another creature from Chilean myth, El Guiravillo or Niravillo, might also be a main ingredient in this folkloric stew. The Mapuche, native to south-central Chile and southwestern Argentina, named this aquatic monster Guiravillo, a compound word of Geru, medium fox, and Vilu, snake. And by the way, I don't know that my pronunciation is stellar on those words, so just keep that in mind. Notably, Crommelin depicted foxes living alongside the lagoon where dwelt the Lamparagua. Now, the Mapuche imagination represents it as having a small, slender body, a cat's head, and an extremely long fox's tail, wrote Cifuentes. It frequents the mouths and pools of rivers, and with its tail it entangles men and animals, drags them to the bottom, and drinks their blood. Other attributes of El Guiravillo, collected by Cifuentes, included a sharp claw on its tail, the ability to stretch like a snake to envelop and swallow a man and animal whole, and in some versions, it is almost circular like a stretched cowhide. Clearly, these pieces of Chilean folklore all work their way into Crommelin's story, but it is unknown how or why Crommelin transformed the reptilian Lamparagua into the arboreal Lamparagua. Did she hear another version of the story, perhaps in which the beast was circular? Was it a mistranslation or a misunderstanding? Or could it have just been creative license? One possibility is that the Argentine boa prefers wetlands and sometimes resides on and around trees, using them as shelter, perches for hunting and sunbathing, where they can sometimes be seen coiled in branches directly over water. The Argentine boa, which can attain a length of 13 feet and a weight of 13 pounds, eats small animals like birds and rodents. Cifuentes noted that, unlike the mythological version, it poses little danger to humans, although small children should be monitored in areas where the snake is present. A brief passage from over the Andes offers another possible moment of inspiration. As Crommelin and a female friend, hair streaming in the breeze, galloped on horseback over the hill south of Valparaiso, Chile, the author noted, "On the cliffs overhead grew strange-looking plants, like dead aloe sticks 10 feet high, with mops' heads outlined against the sky. These were cajuls, spelled C-H-A-J-U-A-L-S, a kind of agave among the rare flowers Miss Marianne North came to Chile to paint. A little later, and their newly sprouted sticks would blossom with spikes of yellow-greenish flowers. But I could not stay for the springtime." An illustration of the plants that Crommelin included with the passage shows Puya chilensis, known locally as chagual, a slightly different spelling, C-H-A-G-U-A-L. Also dubbed the sheep-eating plant, this bromeliad native to central Chile is ironically thought to be proto-carnivorous, absorbing the nutrients from decaying animals that get stuck on the hooked spines of its leaves and die. But Crommelin is not the only source for the Lamparagua. Writing for the religious-leaning Scottish magazine Good Words in 1901, J. Bernard James described an expedition he once made to South America. "Some years ago, I had occasion to penetrate a portion of the virgin forest that lies along the higher reaches of the Parana River. crossing through Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina, wrote James comparing the treetops to the nave of a stately cathedral. The author then set aside the inspirational tone and concluded his article with this unsettling gem of an anecdote. Such are the features of the South American virgin forest that present themselves most strikingly to my mind. These things I have seen, much more I have heard about, but I am reluctant to mention here those weird and gruesome stories that our European civilization proclaims to be merely unauthentic imaginings. Still, I have met men in the backwoods, men whose word I have found in all else to be reliable, who vow that they have seen the Lamparagua, and have but narrowly escaped its encompassing toils. For this awesome tree has the reputation of subsisting, at least by preference, on animal diet, and in the damp atmosphere of night uncoils long tendrils which sway gropingly in the air and encircle any living creature that comes within their reach. Then, hugged in an invincible embrace, the victim dies a lingering death, and its vital fluids are sucked out to give nourishment to its captor. Men even are said to have met this terrible fate, and bleached skeletons have been found in piles about the roots or still suspended from the branches. Some there are who maintain that the Lamparagua is no tree, but a creature of the animal kind, possessing the power of locomotion. Of this, however, I have discovered but little evidence. While of the former assertion, well, without having seen it with one's own eyes, it is impossible to believe, and yet I dare not say I entirely disbelieve. Surely there are more things in nature that have come within the ken of our philosophy. Half a century later, the Lamparagua would receive an unexpected and confusing mention in Travel magazine in a letter from reader Andrea Razzacarifo of Los Angeles. Razzacarifo, whose father was a Malagasy nobleman who died fighting French invaders in 1895, complimented Rain Bennett's article Island Idol Madagascar from the November 1953 issue. Razzacarifo added, "The man-eating tree he mentions is called Lamparagua by the natives and is more legendary than real." Once again, all man-eating tree tales trace their roots back to Madagascar. However, if you are ever riding on the quiet plains of Chile, keep an eye out for a tree where one should not be, and keep a book of matches in your pocket, just in case. Beware the Lamparagua.